Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the AI Integrations Podcast for episode 12. Today, we're going to talk about the AI arms race of USA versus the People's Republic of China and kind of where we're at with it, how it's going, open versus closed. And yeah, to kick us off, we have Spencer, obviously, our resident AI expert. Spencer, how's it going today?
It's going well. Yesterday was a new model day, Ben, so it makes this conversation all the more fun.
So, which new model was it released again?
GPT 5.2, it's their response to Gemini 3 and the code red they got sent out at
First
OpenAI.
impressions?
Amazing. I really enjoy it, and I've got some statistics to share with you to put some numbers behind that. I really enjoy its statement. For example, long context reasoning has always been something that's kind of been a challenge for these LLMs. That's why if you're coding in Cursor or using just ChatGPT, best practices is typically to start a new thread for separate subjects. And this doesn't negate that. But what it means is in the past, the longer you continued in a thread, kind of the worse the model got. And to put some numbers to that, like Grok 4 and Gemini, for example, lose about 50% of their reasoning efficiency towards the end of their context window. And now GPT 5.2 loses 2% of its reasoning power towards the end of its context window.
So let's put this into terms I've been seeing a lot of in the news. I've been seeing people who are using these as their boyfriend or girlfriend type thing, right? And one of the issues they have in the complaints, and people are literally getting upset about this, is after so long of conversation, it kind of forgets everything it talked about before, and it almost resets. Is this going to change that, make it?
It won't entirely solve that, but it's going to help a lot with that issue, yes.
Gotcha. And how big of a difference is this really?
So it's only been out for a day. So I've been using it for less than 24 hours. But my initial reaction is, one of my primary ways I use LLMs is writing software. And it's got a much better ability to understand something you did 20 edits ago that affects an edit you're making now. So taking that over to the boyfriend-girlfriend conversation, if you said something at the start of your conversation, tangent it off on a different topic and come back, I imagine it's going to do a much, much better job of doing that.
Gotcha. And so just how long is this context window again now?
I believe 276,000 tokens.
Wow. And a typical conversation is only using, what, a few hundred to a thousand-ish tokens for most people, right? So this is going to be really a big improvement.
Yeah, you'd have to have a very, very long conversation with novel messages back and forth to really push that to the limit, or be doing things like software engineering or working with the model, which is what their whole big kind of claim for this new model is it's better actually doing, I think the term they use is value generation work. Mm-hmm. A huge part of that is because now if you uploaded a spreadsheet and then you talked about the spreadsheet a bunch, it still knows what the spreadsheet was to a very high level of accuracy.
That actually sounds really good for a lot of the uses I do, because with marketing stuff, a lot of times you want to reference things that you did a ways back, because I'll build, within ChatGPT, for example, I'll use the same thread to build out a whole campaign in different components of all over the place. And I have run into the issue many times where I go, okay, and now I want to do X, Y, Z based on that. And it'll basically start over and give me something completely out of the blue because it forgot what we had talked about 3 hours earlier.
Yeah.
I'm assuming this is going to cure that.
Cure a lot of it. It won't entirely solve it. To entirely solve that, you need million+ token context windows. But the ability to not forget the 276,000, I believe, tokens it has is huge.
Gotcha. Anything else exciting out of Dev Day or release day?
It wasn't Dev Day. It's New Model Day, which is
New Model Day.
I joke with my friends on New Model Day. I'm always up till 2, and you can't really get a hold of me playing with the new model. It's also got a big increase in vision and tool calling ability. So if you upload a picture of something, it does a much better job of reasoning what that picture is to finite details. In the past, if you uploaded a picture of a woman drinking a cup of coffee and it was Starbucks, it might miss the fact that it's Starbucks kind of thing. And now it knows that it's picking up on really fine details in pictures. And then another thing which really makes it good for, again, I think the term they use, value creating work, its tool calling ability. We've talked a little bit about tool calling on the channel, but it's essentially a way for LLMs to interact with other things. Mm-hmm. And so it's got a very big increase in its ability to reliably call tools.
Nice. Sounds like it's going to be playing with this.
Yeah, and then one last note on GPT 5.2, and we can kind of start talking about US and China open closed, is it's more expensive per token, which has a lot of people going, uh-oh, but it's much more efficient at its token usage, which also plays into that context window. So it's not bloating its memory with a bunch of random tokens. And it also means something a lot of people don't realize. If you're using one of these models over the API, i.e. not in ChatGPT, for example, you're paying for all the reasoning tokens as well as the final output. So while it's more expensive, it does so much less reasoning. The same task costs less money.
Interesting. So it's actually more efficient, really.
Yeah, it's much more efficient with its token usage, which is, again, an incredible step towards really AGI. And, this, to be clear, this isn't AGI, but it's a good step in that direction.
And how does this tie into the overall arms races?
So, the USA has always kind of led frontier AI models. The only time we didn't was the DeepSeek shock. And even then, DeepSeek wasn't better than the frontier models at the time. It was just as good as. And so it was on par, but China's never led the frontier model race. What they've kind of been doing is playing a catch-up game continuously, but they're catching up to cutting-edge closed-source frontier US models with open-weight, lab-grown Chinese models. They keep catching up, and it's been happening over time. We've got artificial analysis we can pull up at some point.
Yeah, I was going to say, real quickly, before we pull up artificial analysis, just wanted to chat real briefly on kind of the high-level overall difference between the approach between the U.S. and China in the AI arms race. One of the things I've been seeing, you had sent me a video the other day, I checked out, and I've been seeing in the news, is China is really big on kind of open sourcing, if you will, everything, whereas the US is very much closed. And other than that, are there any other major differences in the approach? Because that piece obviously has the implications of shared knowledge versus containerized knowledge. And that obviously changes the rate of production, the rate of adaptation, the rate of growth. Any other major things, any other kind of foundation stuff before we jump to the numbers?
Yeah, that's a whole rabbit hole in and of itself. So the first thing I want to say on open source, there's only one truly open source model as the way we think of it. So open source traditionally has meant that you can download the code and you own the code and you can run the code and get the exact same output as the person who wrote the code. Mm-hmm. These models are open weight. So without getting too nerdy, essentially they give you the weights, but they don't give you the data. So you can't reproduce this ground up the way that any of the Chinese labs are. So I do want to start off with that clarification of it's open weight, not open source, which is a whole, we could do a whole podcast on that in and of itself. But yeah, I tangented. What was the original question?
I was just wondering that piece, the open weights versus overall closed on the American side versus the Chinese side. What are the major implications besides how much they're sharing data, or are there any?
Yeah, so they don't share the data. The only one that does is an American lab that fully is here's the weights, here's the data.
Gotcha.
And even at that, it's worth adding that software engineering is deterministic, i.e. if I write the same exact code as you do, I get the same exact output as you do. Mm-hmm. With the model training and the weights and the data, even if you have the exact same weights and the exact same data, to get the exact same model would probably take you dozens, if not hundreds, of training runs. Because it's a matter of kind of luck in a sense too, of did it work this training run? It's not deterministic the way that software is.
Gotcha. Okay, let's jump into artificial analysis. This is from artificialanalysis.ai. And what we want to do is kind of just walk through, and I'm going to let Spencer do most of the talking here because he understands this far better than I do. And that is kind of where the US is sitting, where China is sitting, where each side is winning in this race, and then kind of predictions and where we see it going. So starting out here with the Artificial Analysis Intelligence Index.
So yeah, just to start off, my first reaction seeing this is and I've seen this before, obviously, I love artificial analysis. You should check it out yourself. But the top three models are American closed source models. You got Gemini, you got Opus, and you got GPT 5.1. I'm going to go ahead and take a leap of faith here. It's not up yet, but I believe 5.2 is going to be on the top of that now, probably high 70s is my guess. But then if you go excluding those top three, i.e. the frontier model from the big frontier labs, if you look at the next models, you have Kimi K2 thinking, Codex, which is a subset of GPT 5.1, DeepSeek V2, V3.2, and then behind Grok, you have, where is it? Where's Minimax? Minimax M2, which is a little bit behind, but you've got three major Chinese open source models that are in the arena with the closed source American models, Kimi K2 being the best one right now.
So within the intelligence index, right now the US is winning with all of our closed models. How do you see this moving over the next number of months?
So I see this moving the same way for the next couple of months as I do, quite frankly, the indefinite future. Is I see China being Chinese open source AI, to be clear, or open weight. Sorry, I'm contradicting my own statement earlier already. I see Chinese open weight AI being, call it 10 to 20% behind the frontier always. I don't think that there'll be a day where a Chinese open source model is better than a closed source frontier American lab for more than a week. Like if DeepSeek or Kimi did release something that was better than GPT 5.2 now, all the American labs are going to scramble. And as we've seen, and you and I were messaging about the other day, the second a major model kind of gets the new best in class title, all the other labs immediately scramble to beat it, which is why we've got 5.2 so quickly after 5.1. So anyways, I see China essentially being 10-ish% behind the frontier models, but with open weight capabilities, which is a whole different use case and different approach, really.
Gotcha. A couple things I wanted to mention here too is I see the major competitors are Google, Claude, ChatGPT, obviously, Kimi K2's in here. We have Grok in here. I noticed that Facebook, it's at the tail end at a 36. Llama 4 is their latest model, right? Have they given up on the race, do you think?
So Llama 4 is a funny conversation too. When they announced Llama 4, I was so excited. And they're supposed to have 3 different versions of it. Scout, which is the small one, Maverick, which is, call it the medium one, and then Behemoth, which is like the mega model. And we can talk about weights and sizes a little more later. They haven't even released Behemoth. I think it was such a flop that I don't know what they're doing. I will say they hired so much top tier talent this summer. You and I were talking about it on the podcast when it was happening. And they're very good at what they do. PyTorch, which is one of the most commonly used softwares to tune and train these models, is run by Meta. So I don't see them staying. I see one of two extremes happening. I see them either releasing Llama 5, which catches up and is like a Kimi K2 tier, or they just bow out of the race entirely and they're no longer making models and they focus on the application layer. Which one of those is going to happen? I don't know.
Fair enough. So yeah, those are kind of the major players. Shall I move on here?
Yeah, I also think, we were talking about context earlier. So like Grok's in there, 65.
65,
when it's got its full kind of context, right? So one of the incredible things about GPT 5.2 is let's just pretend it's a 75 for argument's sake. At the end of its context, it's probably a 74 or 73. Grok at the end of its context is now you're dropping into the low 40s, high 30s.
Interesting. Okay, moving on down. The next one here is here we go. This is the intelligence index by open weights versus proprietary.
And so that's kind of what I was talking about in the last chart. This one does a really nice job just making it obvious. But those top 3 open source models are all Chinese.
Yes, that would be Kimi K2, followed by DeepSeek, and then Minimax.
Correct, yeah. And then the next one is GPT OSS 120B, which is another interesting conversation on the whole open weight model thing. So Kimi, DeepSeek, and Minimax, their goal was to make the best model they possibly could and then give the weights out. They weren't thinking about the end user in the sense of what hardware are they running this on. Their end user is inference providers like Grok with a Q, and there's a bunch of other inference providers. And the goal with those models isn't so you can run it on your own hardware. It's so a company or organization can run it on a server, and then someone can use it via that server. OpenAI GPT OSS 120B and 20B their open weight models, I think, get less credit than they should. Because quite frankly, when they designed these models, they did kind of a parameters up design, which meant when they started, they said, well, we could make some crazy model that's a trillion parameters, but no one can run it, which means like, why wouldn't you just use our API? Why are you hosting a trillion parameter open source model in the cloud when you could just use ours, you know? Right. So OSS 120B, you can run that on a high-end GPU. Like if you went and bought a 5090 graphics card from NVIDIA and had it in a PC, you could run GPT OSS 120B entirely locally. Whereas Minimax M2, DeepSeek, and Kimi, that's not really a thing. You need essentially a home server at that point to run it fully locally.
What's crazy about that to me is, I mean, you could argue it's mid-tier. It's in the middle of the list here, right? But this is mid-tier among what's already incredible compared to what existed a year ago. This all blowing all that away by far. And you're looking at a stronger model than the best thing Facebook's put out, the best thing that NVIDIA's put out, et cetera. That you're saying you could run completely locally just on a high-end computer, like home computer. You have a good gaming rig, and you can run an AI that even a year ago would be something that would blow anyone away. And even now, it's keeping up with everything, and you can run that fully locally.
Yeah, and I mean, for perspective, GPT OSS 120B is 120 billion parameters. That's what the 120B stands for. Kimi K2 thinking is 1 trillion parameters. So while it gets 6 points higher on this index, it is 9 times the size, 9 and some change times the size, or almost 9 times the size. Anyways, the point is it's much, much, much bigger. You would need 10 5090s,
Gotcha. And then another one I just want to point out real quickly is OSS 20B. This one I think is probably the most common people use at home. I have this running on my laptop already. And this is one that I can run fully locally on a laptop that I bought 7 years ago, and it runs perfectly smoothly. And it's in the runnings.
Yeah, I think OSS 20B, I don't know the exact numbers, but I'm going to guess it's on par with like GPT 4.1. So not the cutting edge this gen stuff, but like you said, a year ago.
It's above 5.1 here.
Oh, wow. Look at that. Yeah. So that's 5.1 with no reasoning, and
correct.
That's a 20B with reasoning. But yes, so even to that note, it's definitely going to be better than 4.1. But like, point is you can now run on not even like a tricked out laptop, or yours is 7 years old. It's high end, but it's 7 years old.
Yep.
And you can run a model now locally that 8 months ago, a year ago, would have been considered state of the art, and that's insane.
That's absolutely incredible. Jumping down, this is the model intelligence over time. And to me, it's less about the companies here, but looking at the slope. As you could tell, it's not exponential growth, but we do have what appears to be linear growth, but constant growth. It's moving up and up and up. So right now, we're hitting these numbers of our intelligence up in the low 70s. And I mean, these models only released, a few months ago?
Mistral Large 3 released like last week.
Right. So these are effectively current models. So we're seeing the trajectory here going from right to left. We see that slope going up. Here we obviously see it left to right. How quickly is it going to keep growing? Is this going to plateau at, when we're hitting intelligence rankings in the 80s or 90s and we're just going to go stopped? Or do you expect this to just kind of keep growing until we have to increase the scale?
I expect
we're going to hit 100 and everything just kind of plateaus there.
I expect it to keep going, and when we hit 100, we'll need a new benchmark. That we've already started maxing out some of the old benchmarks. And I think another interesting thing about this graph, it's a little hard to see in all the chaos. You can essentially see the frontier American models every time they tick up, like OpenAI, for example, the black line. Yeah. So every time it ticks up, if you look at Minimax M2, which is an open source Chinese model, I'm just picking that up, it's easy to see. It's going to tick up afterwards. So you see that jump OpenAI made in March?
Yep.
Minimax M2 made that same jump roughly in November. So that's what I'm saying is, these Chinese models will always I don't want to sound definite about this, but in my opinion, there's a high chance they're always just going to be 10% behind the state of the art.
Interesting. And then what accounts for some of these giant jumps? Is this where kind of things were just lagging, they're catching up again? Like, for example, if you look at XAI here, January 25, it was down in the 20 intelligence index. You hit March and it all of a sudden jumps up to nearly 60, nearly triples its score on the intelligence index. Is that it, just catching up to everything going on in this range right here?
I think it's that, and I also think it's XAI does less frequent model releases than OpenAI does. For example, so OpenAI, you can see there's multiple points on that line in the same time frame that XAI does 1 point. So they're not releasing as many small incremental improvements. They kind of go for the big improvement each time.
Gotcha. And also looking at this, it's pretty clear OpenAI has been leading the pack all along. Yes, at the very end of the list, you see others popping up right above it. But OpenAI has been kind of the leader going through. Do you foresee that continuing, or do you think someone else is going to take over that? Leading the pack.
I see it continuing. I mean, one thing we talked about before we got on this podcast today is, unfortunately, 5.2 isn't live on artificial analysis yet. So I would go ahead and speculate it jumped up a decent amount again, and it's now back on top. So anytime it gets overtaken historically, you and I have talked about this, and I find it really interesting. It's almost like they've got a model in their back pocket that they're like waiting to release for when someone beats them. They retake the lead, and I can't think of a single period of time since this chart begins where they haven't been the best model for more than a month. Like, let's look there. In March, they lost it in March, and then they regained it in May. So I guess that's potentially 6-8 weeks.
Gotcha. Now, one other thing I want to mention here is there's been a lot of news lately about Sam Altman freaking out that Google is taking over winning. If you look at this, Google's been lagging behind OpenAI all the way through until really their latest model. And once again, 5.2 isn't even accounted for here yet. Do you think that's a real fear, or do you think that's more just the media, trying to create some excitement?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think OpenAI was more than likely caught off guard. I was, quite frankly, caught off guard by how good Gemini 3 was. I mean, again, if you look at the incremental increase there, if in roughly May, OpenAI had a significant lead, and then they did a very big jump in November, which overtook them. So I think they were impressed by how much better Gemini 3 was than Gemini 2.5. That being said, I do think the media is overhyping it because it's good clickbait, for lack of a better term.
Gotcha. And then the leading Chinese model right now would be
Kimi.
There's Kimi.
Yep.
Okay, so Kimi, the data here's fairly new. They only start July 25, but they popped it in the middle of the pack and then quickly jumped up to the leaderboards. Do you think they're going to stay with the leaders, or do you think, what's your guess on Kimi in this race here?
Yeah, so Kimi is run by a company called Moonshot AI. I think that it's between them and DeepSeek for who's the best Chinese lab. And that's a whole nother tangent you can go into, is lab versus company. All these Chinese AIs are coming from labs. They're not really worrying about monetizing a product or like the user experience or any of that. They're just trying to make the best model. So I think Moonshot AI, I don't know a lot about them, but from what I do, is an incredible lab. And I think that them and DeepSeek will stay pretty much on the cutting edge. And like I said, be doing that 10% catch up, essentially.
So here's another interesting one to look at: DeepSeek versus OpenAI.
Yep.
You can see DeepSeek's been lagging behind all the way by a fairly consistent amount, but they have been playing a consistent catch up. For example, if you look here, yes, they're behind back in September of 24, right? You jump into March of 25, they're still behind OpenAI, but they've caught up to most of the gains that were made over that past year. You look at current, they're basically caught up again. And so do you think we're just going to kind of see those two lines doing this, with OpenAI leading, DeepSeek just behind? Or do you think there's a point where DeepSeek's going to jump ahead?
I see it doing this. I'm not saying DeepSeek's not capable of jumping ahead. They very well might, but it'd be like Google jumping ahead. Or, I don't know, I'm an OpenAI fanboy. I'm pretty biased on my belief in them staying on top of this. So I believe if DeepSeek did jump ahead, give OpenAI 1 or 2 weeks and they'll jump back ahead.
Gotcha. And then DeepSeek, Kimi being the two major Chinese models, we see both of those are running comparable, right, to
Yep.
the American models. And so you're saying you do think there's going to be that lagging. Is the whole open weights versus completely closed, is that going to make a difference in how fast they develop here?
So China does have an advantage just in the open weights and in the sense of community within this. So the way I view these Chinese companies is they're labs that are almost collaborating. I'm not saying they give everything, they don't share everything with each other,
Mm-hmm.
but it's more of a collaborative, like maybe even call it a national pride thing of like, we're working together. We're going to make these awesome open weight models. Whereas in, like for example, I believe when Kimi dropped the most recent K2 thinking, which essentially caught up to the frontier Americans, I believe both Alibaba, which owns Quinn, and DeepSeek were like shouting them out on X, like, congrats, good job. It's much more of a collaborative community in China around this. Whereas in the US, when Google beats OpenAI, there's no congrats, good job. It's code red. We need to beat them again.
Gotcha. And part of that, I think, kind of just, yeah, as you mentioned, a national pride. It's also, I think, it's just an issue of the difference of capitalism versus communism in the sense of there it's collective working together. Here it's about making a buck. Everyone wants to be the best versus that collectively the best. And so, kind of curious to see how that'll continue to play out.
I agree.
Moving on down, anything interesting here with the intelligence evaluations?
We could talk a lot about these, but on the note of today's podcast, probably skip over them.
Alrighty. Humanity's Last Exam. What a great name for that.
All right, another hot take prediction. GPT 5.2 in the high thinking, extra hard reasoning mode, it's going to get above a 40 on that.
Nice. I'm excited to see when those numbers come out.
Same. I was hoping they'd be out for this podcast.
Oh, well. Physics reasoning. Oh, now here's another interesting one. Physics reasoning. Gemini, far in the lead. Then ChatGPT. But even then, is that something where it doesn't matter much? And are we going to see these other guys really growing and catching up there?
So I think that physics is one of the most complicated things, period. Like, let's take the LLM out of this. Doing research grade physics is, like, in my opinion, one of the hardest things humans do right now. So that one's a really hard one in the sense that I honestly don't know what's going to happen there. I'm very curious where 5.2 falls on that. And the thing is, once that number starts getting in the 50, 60, 70% range, is we can start using AI to help, quote, solve physics and, like unlimited energy and stuff of that nature, which is crazy to think about.
Some crazy stuff. And then once again on USA versus China, we do see DeepSeek and Kimi in here, both sitting at the same level. But while yes, they're both down, they are in a 4th and 6th place, or tied really, I guess, here with a Grok 4.1. We see 3 American companies leading the charts. Do you think that's going to change, or do you think that's more our domain?
I don't even think it's a matter of domain. It's a matter of like how they're trained. And I think that the American labs are prioritizing that training a little more.
Gotcha.
I don't think it's like, oh, does America have better physicists than China? I don't think that plays a role in this. I just think it's a matter of prioritization. And because the models are getting so good at call it some like stock use cases, these frontier American labs have a little more bandwidth, let's say, to start doing things like complex physics and whatnot.
Gotcha. And then on the visual reasoning side, once again, we have the lead with Gemini, followed by GPT 5.1, and then Claude, kind of the same run. Here, I noticed, though, that the Chinese companies start to drop down a bit. Any reason why the visual reasoning, the US is leading that one by so much?
I think it would be that same reason. This is pure speculation.
How we're training.
They haven't put the effort into training. And it might be a prioritization thing too, where, let's pretend that makes a model 5% better, but being a really great software engineer makes it 20% better. I think it's more of a prioritization thing, kind of similar to the physics.
Gotcha. All right, I'm going to keep going here. You let me know what you want to talk through next. Anything here interesting to you? I'm not even sure what the
Um,
Omniscience Index is.
yeah, we can keep going.
Much reliability and
I
hallucination.
talk a little bit about so in America, one thing that
Mhm.
a lot of people don't know is prior to the AI boom, prior to 2020, prior to ChatGPT being released, we operated a lot like China. Like a lot of the labs were publishing papers. Like the paper that helped OpenAI make GPT-1 was released by Google. That
Mhm.
is not going to happen anymore. And
Right. That's
so,
back when OpenAI was actually open.
yeah, yeah. Exactly. Which also brings up another fantastic point as why aren't American labs doing OpenAI? Which is kind of, I don't want to go too long on our podcast here today, but I think that'd be a great topic to kind of chat about real quick.
Hmm.
So one thing, so when DeepSeek DeepSeek R1 was originally released and NVIDIA stock tanked and everything, it's probably about a year ago now. There's talks in the US government of banning open source AI like that. And it's not because we wanted to like say, oh no, we're ignoring the competition. There is a real concern in the sense that if GPT 5.2 that was released yesterday can tell you how to make thermonuclear weapons, let's say, OpenAI is going to do a release today that patches that essentially. If you release something open source, there is no patching. Pandora's box is open, or open weight, sorry. Like
Hmm.
I have the original version of DeepSeek R1 on my laptop, and there are tons of things from a security perspective, and liability perspective, you wouldn't want. So I think that that's more of a concern with American companies and labs of they don't want to open Pandora's box and be liable for Pandora's box. When GPT OSS was like in development, everyone's going, Altman, where is it? Altman, where is it? And he said it was ready 6 months before it actually came out because they wanted to do 6 months of can you trick it into hacking a server testing. They want to do 6 months of safety testing before they release it because once they do, it's out.
Interesting. And fascinating thing if you look here at this openness index, um, this is on the component side, right? Most of the American companies down here not open. Up here we have DeepSeek, we have GLM, well actually GPT OSS 20B there. But and once again, this openness score is just from model availability.
Yeah.
The transparency on methodology, we have the Chinese companies.
Well, we also have NVIDIA in there, which I think is quite interesting.
Oh, tell me a bit about that.
Yeah, so NVIDIA, it's in NVIDIA's best interest if everyone's trying to make their own models because you don't need, but NVIDIA hardware is kind of the best for doing this.
Yep.
That's why they're a $5 trillion, I believe, company now. But so NVIDIA, they're not just releasing the methodology, they're releasing some of the training data, some of the pre and post training data, which is a lot more of a playbook on how you could do this yourself than how you can tune what other companies are doing.
Gotcha. It looks like that's something that almost nobody shares.
Yeah. And so the problem with that is you will never have the best model if you share your pre and post training data.
Right.
So the second you do, a bigger company with more computers is going to take that data and essentially use it in an even more powerful way.
Gotcha. But to your point, NVIDIA is fine with that because no matter who does it, they're going to use their GPUs to do it.
Yeah, exactly.
They want to encourage that.
Okay. Yeah, even the Chinese ones, if you look on that graph, none of them are releasing their data. They're releasing their methodology, their weights is a good way to think of that.
Yep.
So when you download a Chinese model, you get the weights and you can retrain it, which adjusts the weights. You don't get all the training data that got those original weights.
Gotcha. And then here's an interesting one. If you look at this is the openness index versus artificial analysis intelligence index. This is the most attractive quadrant, as they call it, which is the highest openness with the highest intelligence. If you look, a lot of the models here that are highly intelligent, or sorry, highly open, not necessarily the most intelligent models. Down here, some of the dumber models that aren't particularly open. You have those, and then as you go over to the right, it's where they're getting smarter. But once again, you can see the openness is just kind of low all the way across the board. Kimi K2 Thinking, Minimax, those are your kind of highest ones here. What about, oh, okay, this is a 120B, which is obviously a fairly open model. What about Quinn? This is one of the few spots where it's showing up fairly high. Any
Yeah,
thoughts
I
on
like
Quinn?
Quinn a lot. So Quinn's made by Alibaba. Quinn is, I use Quinn 30B for coding locally a ton. I've actually made my own kind of fine tuning distillation of it.
Mhm.
So I think Quinn's good for specialized tasks. I don't think it's ever been good at an all arounder, which is why you don't see it charting high on those charts. But I do find it interesting. I'd never seen this graph before. The DeepSeek R1 is significantly more higher on kind of this ratio of artificial openness to intelligence. Like
Mhm.
Kimi K2 is smarter but less open. And I don't know enough details as to like why that is, but I do find that interesting. Just first reaction looking at the graph.
Interesting. Okay. Oh, okay. Now here's an interesting one. Output tokens. Well, this I think is interesting mostly because this has a lot to do with costs of running the models.
Yep.
What are your thoughts overall on this?
So
You notice
the
that sorry, go ahead.
yeah, my thoughts on this is open source models don't care as much about token optimization because they're not the ones bearing the cost of the wasted tokens. Whereas if OpenAI had GPT 5.1 at double the tokens, like if it was the same as Kimi K2 thinking, that means every time everyone that asked ChatGPT a question, it was twice as inefficient, and that would cost them literally billions of dollars. And so open source models by nature aren't incentivized as much to be token efficient. And I know a lot of people are fans of Grok, and I think Elon's incredible. I think Grok's cool. One of my biggest gripes with Grok is exactly that. It is the only frontier closed weight model that just burns through tokens. So it's not as expensive as like a Claude 4 Opus, let's say, down there at 48 million. But because it uses so much more tokens, I'm going to go ahead and assume it costs more to run.
Interesting. But one of the things I find fascinating here is, as you can see, GPT 5.1 is all the way to the right. My assumption is that's just they've gone for maximum efficiency because this is the model that almost everybody at home is using, and it's to keep their costs down on literally electricity, etc., so that it doesn't bankrupt them, letting people use ChatGPT 5.1 for free.
Yeah, and furthermore on that, GPT 5.1 stock. So in your dropdown, you can choose Instant Thinking Pro. That's instant, so there's no reasoning in that. So if you look over at any of the ones on the far left,
here and here,
you can see there's reasoning versus answer tokens. So GPT 5.1 is just outputting answer tokens. Kimi K2 is doing 130 million reasoning tokens to output 10 million answer tokens.
Interesting. And then what's the advantage to a higher token count? For example, Grok 4 having that very high token usage for the reasoning. Why would they not be more optimized or running on less tokens?
I think Elon doesn't care as much about the financial aspect, and he cares about like the actual I'm not saying he's not intelligent. He's probably the smartest human of our time, but he'd rather have the best model and not care about it costing 20% more than make it 10% less good and 30% less in money. So one of the easiest ways to do that is to throw freaking massive compute at it and just not care about kind of the efficiency of it.
Yeah, overkill doesn't matter. It's the results you're looking at.
Yeah.
So then coming down to
this.
Cost efficiency, do you want to see it as just cost or the cost versus intelligence?
I love cost versus intelligence.
All right, that's this.
Yeah, so as you can see, as far as cost versus intelligence, and I really wish GPT 5.2 was on this yet again. Gemini 3 Pro and Claude 4 or Claude Opus 4.5 are kind of the best cost versus intelligence right now. And then Gemini 3 Pro.
So those are okay. To the right is higher cost. To left is lower cost. Higher up is more intelligent. So I believe this upper left is your cheapest for smartest, right? And this is your smartest, but also expensive.
Yeah. Okay. My apologies. That makes more sense. But yeah. So it's really interesting to see that all the high intelligence versus cost of that quadrant, 3 of the 4 are open source: DeepSeek, GPT-OSS, and Minimax.
Here's another interesting piece. Grok 4, as we're just looking at the token usage, fairly high up the intelligence, but very expensive to run. 4.1 fast, though, on the other hand, looks like about the same intelligence as 4. Let's see, it's a 4513 versus, or no, that number does not correlate. Looks like it's about as high, though, on the intelligence scale, but far cheaper to run.
Correct. Yeah. And that's
why would you ever use Grok 4 over 4.1 fast?
Because you care about the extra 2% in intelligence.
Gotcha. That makes sense.
Which is when I would argue use ChatGPT.
There you go. And, yeah, and that's the other thing. If you're going for maximum intelligence, you're not worried about the cost. Looks like Gemini 3, Claude again, and GPT-5 high are the clear winners here. And 5, GPT, ChatGPT, or GPT 5.1, 5.1, Gemini, Claude are your clear leaders if you're not worried about the cost.
Even a good thought exercise is, okay, so in theory, DeepSeek v3.2 is like the best cost versus intelligence in this chart. What if it took you 10 times to do something? Like you had to ask DeepSeek v3.2 to try 10 times to do something, where Claude Opus 4.5 could do it first try. So even though it's cheaper, it's not, because it had to do so much more to get to the same result.
Gotcha. So the point is, you might have, sure, these are going to be cheaper to use, but you might have to use them 2-3 times, at which point your actual cost, not your cost per run, ends up higher.
Yeah.
And looking at it this way real quickly here. Yeah. And wow, look at this. The reasoning cost is where everything goes on a Grok 4. And that's, I think, back to that token usage.
Yeah. And so Grok 4 is much cheaper than Claude Opus 4.5 per token. But this is to run the same testing. It ends up being more expensive than Opus 4.5. And I should mention, at a lower quality output, as we've seen in all these charts, Opus 4.5, kicks Grok 4's ass in a lot of ways. And it's more expensive per token, but it's so much more efficient at token usage. It is cheaper and better, not just better.
Interesting. Okay, speed and latency, output speed. This, to me, is going to be very important, especially as we start moving into hardware usage, where we're tying AI into all of our day-to-day activities. When it's in your watch, in your cars, in your everything, your microwave. I have AI in my washer and dryer. So the output speed, and this is your tokens per second. Does this really matter all that much, or is this really just about how quickly it processes?
I think anything over 60, 70 is good. And I say that in the sense that, if you're outputting 60 tokens a second, it looks like somewhat like a courtroom typist is typing on your screen, but maybe 100. I don't know how fast a courtroom typist would type in tokens per second. My point is 60 is kind of the threshold where I personally start to get annoyed. That being said, tons of people I follow in the space, it's like 150. It's all personal preference. I do think that with the ability to do complex reasoning, it'll help, because that's in the actual output, right? So for like a simple query, 60 might be fine. But if it needs to do 10 reasoning steps, that 60 versus 150 will add up in the difference, if you know what I mean. So again, I want to shout out OpenAI and say that they've got the only open weight model that's in contention here.
120 and 20B are both here.
Yeah, they optimized it to run incredibly quickly and on hardware people own. And it's still kind of in the ring with all the other great models.
Gotcha. So coming to price real quickly, to me, price is a very direct correlation to energy usage and efficiency, right? Price is a measure of how powerful effectively. It does not mean that the more expensive is necessarily more powerful, because the efficiency is turned in as well. But you get too expensive, you get less practical as well. Do you think the balance is pretty good here? Or do you think this is something where we're going to see a big change? And how much does hardware make a difference here?
I think we're going to see even more polarized change here. So I think this graph's going to get even, the cheap's going to get even cheaper and the expensive is going to get even more expensive. If you want a model that can do incredibly complex programming or calculus or physics, let's say, I think you're going to need to pay for that model. And you're going to be happy to do so because paying, again, that model once is better than paying a less intelligent model 20 times to do the same job. And again, so if you can see Grok there, Grok's the second most expensive model. And it's one of the worst at token usage. So just like, and to be clear, the prices on the screen are per token.
Right.
So when you combine that with the token usage, it's so darn expensive. And this is actually the first chart seeing GPT 5.2 on, which is worth noting. It's in high.
Oh, hey, there it is.
High reasoning. It costs roughly what Gemini 3 Pro does, and a little bit less than Claude 4.5 Sonnet, and a good amount less than 4.5 Opus. I think that that's a sweet spot for them pricing wise. If it's better than 4.5 Opus and costs less, and it's better than GPT or Gemini 3 Pro and costs a negligible amount more, like it's going to be the default for those hard problem tasks. I mean, it's already become mine, and I've had it less than 24 hours.
And I noticed like Mini Max, a lot of the some of the Chinese models here, Kimi K2, they're much cheaper. Is that because they're just trying to be competitive, make sure people are using them, or why are their pricing models so much lower? All the expensive ones are American.
I think it's because two things. A, the closed source American models, we don't have any numbers on like how many parameters they are. The rumors are 2, 3, 4 trillion. So just with that in mind, they're easily twice the size of the Chinese ones. So it means you need more hardware to run them, just at its most 4. And then B, the nature of the open source models is highly, highly, highly competitive. Because anyone can put, not anyone, but it's a lot easier to put a Kimi K2 on servers and charge people to use it than it is to make your own foundational model. So because of that, there's a lot more competition of people putting these models on servers, which means they can't, price gouge a 50% margin. Whereas the closed source ones, OpenAI is going, hey, if you want to use it, here's the price,
Gotcha. Okay. Output speed versus price. I don't think we need to jump and let me know if there's anything you want me to stop on here.
No, we're 50 minutes in, so we should maybe wrap up.
All right, let me pull that down. And so overall, let me kind of just recap here. It looks to me as though the US is winning the AI race kind of all the way across the board. Currently, where I see that changing is as these models keep growing, as they keep getting better, as tokens are going up, as parameters are going up, we're getting higher and higher energy costs. And not in the sense of the dollar amount, but needing more energy, more electricity to run these things. Where I see that this race can go south for the US is we have a massive amount of regulation around energy and around building power plants, quite frankly, that China doesn't have.
Correct.
Here, if you want to open a nuclear power plant, good luck, and it's going to take you time. I know there's been a lot of talk recently from the Trump administration about making that easier, opening up, et cetera. But even then, the time it takes to build these things in the US takes forever. Gone are the days where we were able to build the Empire State Building, and I believe it was fully completed in under 3 years. Now it takes decades almost to get anything done. Whereas in China, if they need more energy, they can just throw up a new power plant in someone's backyard and no one complains about it. That's how regulation works there. My fear is that while, yes, we're ahead and we have the better engineers and the better tech overall currently, when we get to the point where we're hitting the edges of our energy production, is China going to just pass us right up because they're not going to run into those same challenges?
That is a very worthwhile thought. I don't have an answer to that. I think that a lot of people are talking about that in geopolitics. And a lot's being done. Nuclear power plant stocks have gone wild over the past year for that exact reason. I think it's interesting. And also the whole collaborative versus competitive landscape. In theory, 4 Chinese labs collaborating stand a lot better chance of beating one of the frontier American labs,
Hmm.
Whereas if we all collaborated, we'd stand a better chance, but that ruins kind of some of the monetization that's happening with the American models. So that's an interesting one. I also think I want to say I use both closed source American models
Hmm.
and open source Chinese models on a daily basis. Like they are
Hmm.
both so useful for so many things. And as they get smarter and smarter, and like I said, China kind of does this 10% catch up each time, there's going to be a point where an open source model is able to do 90% of what you want it to. And one of the advantages to open source models is everyone's going to hear China and, at least in America, a lot of people are worried about data security.
Hmm.
If you configure the Chinese models on your own servers, they are infinitely more secure than sending things to OpenAI or Anthropic or Google. It's all local. So there's going to be a point where Chinese open source models are good enough, cheap enough, and secure enough to do 80% of what we kind of want these models to do. So I think that's almost how they, quote, win the AI race if they win. It's not going to be having the best model. It's going to be having the most used model because you can actually run it on reasonable hardware at a reasonable price, and it's secure.
Gotcha. And one more thing I wanted to talk about here, and this is kind of a little more on the philosophical side, and that is, does this AI arms race that everyone's talking about actually matter? And what it is, take World War II, for example. The nuclear arms race mattered, right? Whoever got nukes first won the war. Thankfully, it was us, because at that point, everybody else said, we give up, right? There was an unconditional surrender by Japan at that point. The end goal of the AI arms race is AGI, artificial general intelligence, the in AI that is effectively perfect for all intents and purposes to the human. With the way these are growing, let's say China does get there first. Does it actually matter, or are we just going to get there 6 months later and it's still level playing field? Because is AGI going to do anything in the time that one person gets there, if that actually ever gets achieved? Let's assume it does. Let's say China gets there. In 6 months, it takes us to catch up, because we will.
Yeah.
Does it actually make a difference? Is there anything that AGI is going to do? Let's say they win the arms race. Anything that's going to occur because of that actually makes a difference for the world, for people? Or is this really more of a race just because, a national pride type thing?
I think it's incredibly important for national security that we get there first. And I'm going to give you a few reasons.
Mm-hmm.
So true AGI. And so one of the biggest kind of obvious things to me that's going to matter here is cybersecurity.
Mm-hmm.
If you have an AI that is better at offensive and defensive cybersecurity than any human in the world, that means essentially you become unhackable and you can hack anything. That's incredibly concerning. From
a day could be enough time to change the world.
Yeah, exactly. So if China got the best model in the world, AGI, for 6 months, and they didn't use it in a malicious way, and then we get it too, all is good. But the same could be said about like nuclear weapons. If yeah. So that's a concern. And then there's also just like the strategic implications. If AGI is as smart as we make it out to be in our heads, could it help them with their geopolitics and the whole situation with Taiwan? And, could they kind of leverage this intelligence advantage they have that we don't? So I think it's arguably more important than the nuclear arms race. And I'll finish the tangent with this thought. The nuclear arms race was about bombs hitting locations.
Right.
In today's digital world, having a AGI level AI essentially means that you can touch, you can affect every digital surface in the world. You can take down power grids. You can take over computers. It's honestly, in a lot of ways, more concerning. Not to be all AI doomsday but I think it's super important that we win the AI arms race.
Gotcha. So on the negative side, the arms race truly does matter. On the positives, probably not. We'll all get the benefits of it through time. But for as a weapon, which sadly AI can be, not is inherently, but can be used as
100%.
It does really matter.
Yeah, there's a company called Andril that literally their whole thing is AI weapons.
Mm-hmm. And what's your prediction? Are we going to ever achieve AGI? And if so, how far out are we? I know Musk has predicted by 2030. I know various people have different predictions. I wonder if I mean, are we ever going to actually get there? And if
Yeah.
we do, is it going to be as big of a deal as we think? You're saying yes, it will, but do you think we are going to get there? And what kind of time frame are you thinking?
I tend to agree with Musk on 2030. The only reason I think we wouldn't get there by then is regulatory. As you mentioned earlier, we need a ton of power plants, and NVIDIA needs to make 10 times what they're currently making. And a lot of things have to scale in a way we haven't really done before. But I think that the current administration kind of sees that and they know that. Like, I live in Austin, Texas, and they invested, I believe, $500 billion in a Stargate data center a couple hours north of here. Maybe it's more than a couple hours. I haven't driven up there. But in Western Texas, there's a data center that's $500 billion. And it's primarily for combating what we're talking about, So, and at the end of the day, we own the hard, back to my AI trifecta theory: algorithms, compute, and data are the three things you need to make quality AI. Algorithms are essentially derived from quality engineers. And I do believe China's got good engineers. I believe America's got the best engineers. So I think we're going to win on that, especially if we prioritize
compute.
That's a very interesting one. But at the end of the day, NVIDIA, which is the pioneer of AI compute, is an American company. Now, they do rely on TSMC, which is why TSMC is making plants in the US and Taiwan such a hot thing geopolitically. But I think at the end of the day, we win the compute arms race as well. Data is the one that scares me the most, because if our government is being honest with us and all of big tech's following the data laws we have in the US, it is simply impossible for us to have more data than China. Even if we had the same laws and did the same practices as China, they have so much more people and so much more data being generated to learn off of. So at the end of the day, I think we win two of the three, which means I think we win overall. But it's
interesting.
We're going to see.
I have a disagreement on that. I think we lose on compute
because of the power.
Because of the power, correct. We have the tech, and the chips, everything else. NVIDIA is going to supply us first, etc. I think we lose on the power. And that scares me. Unless there's some serious change there in the government, we will lose on the power, because in China, it's unlimited power in the sense of they'll just do whatever they have to do to have it. Yeah. If we don't get past regulation here, we're going to lose on power, and power translates to compute.
I couldn't agree more, actually. And with that being said, I think whoever wins two of the three will probably win the whole thing, so to speak.
Probably.
So even if we do have the better engineers, if they've got more compute and more data, they're probably going to, quote, win the race. And I think that's why the whole power thing and compute thing are such hot topics right now.
So one final anecdote here, which in my head is just absolutely hilarious and great. When I was 16, I started college, and I took a chemistry class. My professor, Dr. Daryl Linthicum, incredible guy, super smart, was a nuclear scientist.
Okay.
And he told us back then, this is back in 2001, I believe it was, if we don't go nuclear, your grandkids will be seen in the dark. And back then, basically, everyone laughed it off. Nobody believed it. And he wasn't joking. He was completely serious. But yeah, what he said is, if we don't go nuclear, your grandkids will be seen in the dark. And it's funny because I've always maintained that. I basically believed every word that came out of this guy's mouth. He's one of the smartest people I ever met in my life. And I've told people that probably 100 times over the past 2 decades, right? And every time I did, I got the exact same pushback. You're crazy. No, we don't need to. Chernobyl, 3 Mile Island. And it was always the same story. And to me, it's just so gratifying to go, ha! Because the truth is, if we don't go nuclear, our grandkids are going to be seen in the dark, because we're eating up all the power. And it really, to me, the biggest thing in this entire race, because we do have the greatest minds. Not that China doesn't have great minds. They have incredible ones working on AI over there. We have the collection of, I would argue, the best in the world. I really think the biggest risk of us losing this race is energy. And the only solution we have to that, right? There's 2 solutions I see to that: nuclear here on Earth, or B, data centers in space, meaning that the compute and the power are both generated in space. Solar is much more effective up there. Satellites that are doing the processing as well as their own energy generation. Obviously, that has its own host of complications as well. But if we don't figure out one of the two of those and quickly, I fear we're going to lose.
I agree. And there's a Y Combinator startup that's doing satellite or data centers in space for that reason. Not to really short, we don't need to tangent on this as we're already at an hour. But one thing that kind of is interesting to me is, nuclear launch sites are one of the most secure things a government has. Like,
yep.
They're all locations no one knows, incredibly secure, etc. I believe there will be a point, if it's not already happening, where there's data centers like that for AI, for the government. And that's where physically having it on American soil run by a nuclear power plant makes a lot more sense from a security perspective than allowing it to float around the world in orbit.
Space Force might actually get his real place in history too at some point.
Okay,
on those happy notes, anything else you want to add, Spencer, or do you think we covered it?
No, fun chat. I mean, I could talk another hour about it, but I think an hour is a good length for a podcast. And thanks for joining us on episode 12. And feel free to DM me on LinkedIn if you have any kind of questions about this. We'll link both of our LinkedIns in the video description.
Yep. Like, comment, subscribe wherever you're watching. We are on LinkedIn. These go out on Twitter as well as YouTube. Have a wonderful weekend, everybody. Thank you so much and take care. Bye.